everyone, welcome to Chartists. I'm your gentleman, Alan Kase, saying Sorry, I just wanted to do that. Anyway, Halloween. Happy Halloween! Don't play with knives, kids. Anyway, why am I not wearing a costume? I am wearing a costume. I'm sexy gentleman. Keep up. Now, Halloween. Halloween is one of those fun holidays that you just kind of celebrate because you want to. There's no real religious or national compulsion to do it, like Christmas or Independence Day. We just do it because it's fun, and humans are kind of weird. And depending on the holiday, always a little too willing to show off our gluttony. It's like St. Patrick's Day, except this time the holiday actually originates from Ireland. What does this have to do with music? And didn't I already comment that Halloween doesn't have any real music to speak of?
Well, compared to Halloween, the Christmas season is a veritable oasis of musical thought.
Huh, I guess I did say that. Well, screw you, old me! I'm gonna try anyway! Now first, a little history. There's a lot of history that I'm going to be ridiculously glossing over here, but Halloween, at least in the sense that I'm using it, has its roots in traditional Celtic and Gaelic harvest festivals that commemorated, among other things, the souls of long-dead ancestors. Over the years, it has steadily evolved beyond that, including being partially absorbed by Christianity, and here we are today. And while Halloween is commonly looked at as a North American thing, most cultures actually have either Halloween proper or an equivalent to it. Their non-Disney trademarkable equivalent to it. But being that I'm a fat, stupid American, I'm not going to force myself to bungle Alla Helgons Dag or the Oban Festival because I'm sure I would get just everything fantastically wrong. I'm not even sure I've pronounced either of those even a little bit correctly. So I'm mostly going to be talking about North American Halloweens and particularly their music. Now, it's very common here that we don't have a whole lot of Halloween music, especially compared to the jolly old fat ass setting 2 months over. But that's not entirely accurate. It's more that while Christmas songs tend to be designed specifically for the holiday, Halloween fare is usually a little more improvised. Hell, even this very video began with a piece of music that doesn't have jack squat to do with Halloween. But music does have a long history with the holiday and its various associated festivals, and there are actually a lot of semi-forgotten ballads and chants from over the centuries that are attached to it. In fact, one of the more popular ones, you can see here being Murdered by Sting, explains in part where we got trick-or-treating from. These sorts of creepy old songs continue to be written and recorded all the way up until the middle of the 20th century, especially in genres like jazz and blues, where the topics of things like spirits were really popular and artistically inspiring. But over time, Halloween changed a lot, and at least in North America, it's gone from being a holiday about celebrating the dead and has turned into celebrating ghoulies and ghosties and, stuff like that. Similarly, since around the middle of the last century, Halloween music has been doing roughly the same thing. So as part of this pointless history lesson, let's start off with the 50s and 60s. Why then? Well, basically because most of the really important pop culture history starts around then. Also, I'm lazy. And yes, I'm aware of when I skip songs and broadly generalize. This is a short history video, not an encyclopedia set. Let's ask ourselves, what's a word that jumps to mind when discussing the late 50s and early 60s? How about moronic?
Does your chewing up through the finger from the bedpost go like your mother said don't chew it, do you swallow it, it's fine.
Yeah, moronic sounds about right. See, the 50s and the 60s liked stupid, kinda goofy things, and one of the most popular trends were what were called novelty hits.
Ooh, I discovered a... right before my eyes. Ooh, I discovered a... right before my eyes.
Novelty hits can be described in many different ways, usually being defined as songs intending to be silly and funny, but I tend to look at them more as being random and meaningless. And while they certainly can be funny, to me that's not really their biggest defining trait, especially back in the 50s.
Let me tell you about Ahab, the Arab.
Novelty songs being what they are, it's no surprise that one day somebody up and said, "Hey, why don't we just add monsters to this stuff?" So we wound up with things like, yes, the Monster Mash, but also a whole bunch of asinine garbage like Haunted House, Witch Doctor, Little Red Riding Hood if you want to count that,
Hey there, Little Red Riding Hood.
and a ton of other stupid random junk. And this crap was really popular. You gotta understand, the power of the novelty fad made this a top 5 hit.
This is John Cameron on the spot. And now I believe we're about to hear the words of the first spaceman ever to land on Earth. And now, here are the bowl scores.
I'm not going to say that there's never been anything as unfunny as this trend. But it's pushing it. That's not to say that there's all there was. There were a few more serious songs, I Put a Spell on You being the most obvious.
I put a spell on you.
But overall, this age in music usually stuck with being kooky. This idea didn't really cross over to the 70s. So I know that I just made it sound like a song being stupid or goofy is always automatically bad, but that's not entirely accurate. We'll come back to that. But for now, I'd just like to state that the exact opposite can be just as irritating. This would be exactly the case for the 1970s, where everything, especially the lyrics, needed to be dark and serious and usually kind of metaphorical in some way. Obviously, a lot of this is the result of the Bob Dylan, Beatles singer-songwriter era coming in and sweeping all the ridiculousness away. Idiotic things like the Purple People Eater aren't really good for artsy symbolism, so mostly musicians decided to ditch scary monsters in favor of things like witches and ghosts and Satan. And these things always meant something. Drugs or war, something like that. Now, that's not calling these songs bad. I like Highway to Hell and Don't Fear the Reaper and Rhiannon and stuff, but let's be real here, these aren't fun songs. And no matter how many downloads they get, they won't be able to fit the holiday. I may like Hotel California a lot, but it's not like it's really about Satanists or witches or Hotel Transylvania or whatever. It's a metaphor about the evils of Hollywood, I think. So, yeah, the 70s could probably stand to pull the stick out of its butt just a little. And while there was still a small handful of fun, weird, and Halloweenish songs like Werewolves of London and Rocky Horror, and of course this really sensitive gem,
How'd you get so funky?
overall dance parties are kind of forced to write off the entire decade.
Did you do the funky?
Alright, yes, except Superstition, but ignoring that, there wouldn't really be any fun Halloween music until the 1980s. The 1980s is probably the best balance between the goofy 50s and the dour 70s. Usually people tag Thriller as the big Halloween 80s song, but I don't think that's entirely fair. For one, there were already several big songs that were kind of in line with Thriller before it was even recorded. And also, Thriller was the result of a trend, not the beginning of it. The 80s were the age of the synth revolution, and with exceptions to outliers like In the Air Tonight and Maneater, this is where most of the creepy pop music comes from. Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, Somebody's Watching Me, Twilight Zone, Ghostbusters, Maniac, the genre was full of them, with or without Thriller. And if you're really gonna stretch, then there's also a healthy amount of sci-fi songs to throw into the mix. I mean, what else are you gonna do with this thing? So, yes, there is a reason why most of the dance jams you'll hear on Halloween come out of the 80s. The decade was basically tailor-made for this kind of stuff. Even classics like the Monster Mash and Frankenstein got 80s pop rap makeovers for it. That's just how big it was. But that's not all the 80s had. There were also horror movies. 80s horror movie franchises loved cheesy marketing, and there was a whole branding ecosystem attached to practically all of them. If you grew up in the 90s, you might think soundtracks are either boring scores or compilations of random songs from crappy rock acts. Back in the 80s, horror movies loved having ridiculous rap and metal songs dedicated to the main film. I mentioned Friday the 13th before, but there was also so much more than that. Fright Night, Gremlin, Lost Boys, Pet Sematary, Batman, a whole slew of Nightmare on Elm Street songs. And my personal favorite, the lamest soundtrack song that I've ever heard. The Chucky song from Child's Play.
He said, hi there, ain't I lucky? Pleased to meet you. Call me Chucky. I'll always be your very bestest friend.
And while it's not as fondly remembered today as the 80s synth boom was, the soundtrack factor is still important because of the two, it's actually the one that made it into the 90s in some way. And speaking of terrible segues, okay, so I hope you like the last two segments because this one is not going to be as good. Why? Well, honestly, there isn't really a lot to find in the 90s when it comes to Halloween-friendly music. Yeah, you had your mandatory once-per-decade Halloween musical, and occasionally you'd get one of those highbrow metaphorical rock songs. But the 90s apparently decided that its main Halloween music idea was going to be to beat everyone over the head with self-proclaimed scary stuff. This is where you wind up with things like Marilyn Manson and the Insane Clown Posse and the beginnings of nu metal. Popular music mostly stopped focusing on inciting a weird, creepy kind of feel and instead just went with telling you, "Hey, this is scary!" Think of it as the difference between The Ring and Hostel. You might leave Hostel feeling a little unnerved, but it has less to do with being creeped out and more to do with being irritated by Eli Roth dangling his bizarre vivisection fetish in front of you. And as for ideas beyond getting a whole lot darker, the 90s just didn't really have that many, and by the middle of the decade, Halloween music had lost basically all of its steam, and it wouldn't find its feet again for a long, long time. I'm not overreaching when I say that this kind of music went dormant for almost 15 years. And honestly, I think the reason for that was that people were just too self-aware for it. Jay-Z wasn't going to try making Addams Family Want Part 2, you understand? About the closest you can come for a long time other than a few weak covers is Nelly Furtado's Man-Eater, and that song is garbage and has been rightfully forgotten. But just as the 2000s were drawing to a close and things appeared their lightest, Frankenstein fired up the machine and the monster came right back to life. First, in 2007, there was the release of Sweeney Todd and its soundtrack, which... okay, yeah, that barely qualifies, but it's better than nothing. And while that could have just been a fluke, it surprisingly wasn't. The following years would see not just the release of movies like Repo the Genetic Opera, but also honest-to-God singles. Now, as far as I can tell, the big idea for Halloween music post-2007 is basically what the 80s did, but a lot subtler. Most of it sounds like typical club music that just so happens to be Halloween-friendly. Things like Disturbia, Bad Romance, In the Dark. And yes, In the Dark counts, and don't see how it doesn't. Now, obviously not every year is going to have something creepy to go along with it, but it's becoming more common than you'd think. I mean, we did just have this last year. And hell, 2015 even has a song that straight name-checks a horror movie. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that some of this slack has been picked up by online sources like YouTube and this many musical acts. So yes, things are improving, at least if you like this genre. And if you don't, then... sorry. So what can we take from all this? Well, first off, you don't always have to go with playing Thriller and the Monster Mash on repeat for your damn party. And also that Halloween music comes in waves, and now we're hitting a patch of people just enjoying themselves in a creepy way. Which I approve of. It's nice having real artists put out weird stuff just for fun. I mean, we probably wouldn't even have Thriller or the Monster Mash without it. So, thanks, soulless music industry. Even when you're really terrible, you're still pretty entertaining. Now, this has been your Ginger Gentleman, Alan Kase, saying good night. And until next time, happy Halloween.
It's